The night had settled over Willow Creek like a heavy blanket, muffling sounds and leaving the world in soft darkness. Emma sat curled in the corner of her living room, a mug of tea warming her hands. The flickering fire painting her walls with shadows that danced like silent companions. Her husband Daniel had promised he would return from his business trip by midnight. But as the hours crawled by, his absence pressed against her chest like an invisible weight. She tried to focus on her book, but each time she read a paragraph, her mind wandered back to the empty chair across the room, to the ticking of the old clock, and to the quiet loneliness of the house. A sharp knock at the door startled her. Emma's heart jumped into her throat. Who could be visiting at this hour? She wasn't expecting anyone. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing there was a man she had never seen before, tall and confident, holding a leather briefcase. There was a calm in his posture, a quiet authority that contrasted with the storm brewing outside. His dark coat was damp from the rain, and his hair stuck slightly to his forehead. Despite the late hour, his eyes were steady and focused. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said politely as she opened the door a crack. His voice was deep, calm, and non-threatening. "I'm looking for Daniel Hughes. I'm a colleague. He asked me to stop by if he didn't make it back on time." Emma hesitated, unsure whether to let him in. The warmth of the house behind her and the wind and rain outside made her pause. But something about his presence, his quiet, professional demeanor, suggested safety rather than danger. She took a deep breath and stepped aside. "Please, come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man introduced himself as Michael. He was polite, measured, and careful not to overstep any boundaries. Yet there was an energy about him, a subtle magnetism that Emma couldn't quite place. They sat in the living room, and as the storm raged outside, the fire's glow reflected across the polished wood floors and their faces. At first, their conversation was ordinary. Work, the weather, small talk. But gradually, Emma noticed something unusual. Michael listened, truly listened. Not just hearing words, but paying attention to her pauses, her expressions. The small details she didn't even realize she was revealing. She found herself speaking more freely than she had in months. She talked about the pressures of her work, the strain of Daniel's long trips, and her quiet fears that sometimes seemed too heavy to carry alone. Michael responded with empathy and gentle understanding. He never pushed or pried, but his attentiveness made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. There was a certain warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the fire. Hours passed. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows and wind rattling the shutters. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine, and Michael noticed immediately. "You shouldn't be standing near the window during the storm," he said softly, guiding her gently to the couch. His hands brushed hers for the briefest moment, nothing intimate, yet enough to make her heart skip. For the first time in a long while, she felt both safe and strangely alive. His presence was comforting, protective, and aware, a stark contrast to the loneliness that had filled her evenings. Emma realized that while Daniel had been away, she had longed for this, someone to notice her, someone to care without asking anything in return. The warmth she felt was complicated, stirring emotions she hadn't anticipated. As midnight approached, the storm outside became relentless. Thunder rolled across the skies and the lights flickered. Emma's worry about Daniel's delay returned, sharp and insistent. Michael, however, remained calm. He moved to check the fuse box, then returned with a flashlight when the power went out completely. He reassured her, never once making her feel unsafe. Instead, his calm presence grounded her, and she found herself clinging, emotionally, to the sense of protection he provided. She glanced at him, noticing the way the firelight highlighted his features, sharp, composed, yet approachable. His dark eyes seemed to catch every flicker of her expression, every slight tremor of her hands. Emma felt a rush of emotions she couldn't name, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something more profound she dared not analyze. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the storm outside. And the usual distance she felt from other people disappeared. When the storm's intensity eased slightly, Michael looked toward the door, indicating that he should leave soon. "I should go," he said softly, the words heavy with unspoken understanding. Emma nodded, though a part of her didn't want him to leave. The connection had been quiet, subtle, yet powerful. He moved toward the door, rain dripping from his coat. And as he reached for the handle, he paused and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was careful, protective, and fleeting, but it left her breathless. The door closed behind him, and Emma stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. Her chest still fluttered from that single, gentle touch. The fire crackled quietly. The storm had retreated into whispers. And yet a sense of change lingered in the room, subtle and profound. She sank into the couch, her thoughts racing. Something inside her had shifted during those few hours. Michael's presence had awakened feelings she hadn't recognized, the longing to be seen, to be acknowledged, to feel secure in someone else's care. She didn't understand why a stranger could have such an impact. Yet she felt her heartbeat echoed the memory of his hand, the calm in his voice, the careful attentiveness he showed her. The hours after he left were quiet, but Emma didn't sleep. She replayed every detail in her mind, the way he had spoken, the way he had listened, the warmth and security he had radiated. For the first time in months, she felt a strange combination of fear and exhilaration, loneliness and connection. When the first light of dawn touched the curtains, Emma rose from the couch and walked to the window. The storm had passed, leaving a wet, shining world behind. She thought of Michael standing outside in the rain, steady, composed, protective. That single night had left an indelible mark, not in actions, but in emotions. She realized that she would remember him, and that memory would change her perspective on her own life, her own relationships, and her own heart. She turned to look around the room, feeling a mix of clarity and confusion. She loved Daniel. She was committed to her life. But the night had shown her how fragile emotions could be. How quickly a stranger's presence could awaken dormant feelings. She realized she had to navigate these new emotions carefully, without acting recklessly, yet with full awareness of the stirrings within her. Emma spent the rest of the morning preparing for the day. She made breakfast, tidied the living room, and even answered a few work emails. But her mind kept drifting back to Michael, his calm voice, the steadiness of his presence, the touch that had lingered in memory. The world seemed brighter, more complicated, and more alive than before. By the time she heard the hum of her car engine and the distant sound of Daniel returning, Emma felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. She opened the door to greet him, yet in her mind, the night's events still played vividly. That evening she realized something crucial. Some encounters, brief and unexpected, could shift a person's inner world profoundly. And no matter how carefully she tried to dismiss the memory, Michael's presence, his calm, gentle attention had left her heart breathing differently than it had before. She closed the door behind Daniel, feeling the familiar warmth of home, yet aware that she had changed, that something new had awakened inside her, subtle but undeniable. She didn't understand the full scope of these feelings, nor did she need to. For now, she only knew that the night had passed, but its impact on her soul lingered, a quiet, persistent reminder that life could surprise her in ways she had never anticipated. The morning after that stormy night, Emma tried to shake off the feelings that had crept into her heart. She told herself it had been nothing more than a harmless encounter, a coincidence that had made a lonely night less frightening. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Something inside her had changed. Michael's calm presence had stirred emotions. She didn't even realize she still possessed the need to be seen, to be understood, to feel safe in someone's company. Daniel returned home later that morning, tired but cheerful, his suitcase rolling behind him. Emma greeted him with a smile that felt both genuine and strained. He hugged her, spoke about his meetings, his deadlines, his exhaustion, but never once noticed the quiet in her eyes. As he talked, she nodded, trying to listen. Yet her mind drifted to that single night, the sound of rain, and the warmth of a stranger's voice that had felt more comforting than her husband's words now. Days passed, and life slipped back into routine. Daniel left early for work, came home late, and spent his evenings answering emails or making calls. Emma busied herself with her job at the local gallery, her morning jogs by the lake, her quiet dinners alone. Yet, no matter how she tried to push the memory away, Michael's image returned, the steady gaze, the soft tone, the way he had listened to her as if her thoughts mattered. One rainy afternoon, she received a message on her phone. It was an unknown number, but the moment she opened it, her pulse quickened. "Emma, it's Michael. I hope this isn't too forward. I just wanted to make sure you're doing all right after that night." She stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. Her heart raced and her hands trembled slightly. She knew replying could open doors she shouldn't step through. But the kindness in his words felt like an anchor in her quiet, lonely world. After a deep breath, she typed back, "I'm fine, thank you." That storm was something, wasn't it? That was how it began, a simple, harmless exchange that quickly grew into something deeper. Over the following days, they texted occasionally. At first about casual things, the weather, work, books, even her favorite tea brand. But soon their conversations slipped into more personal territory. He asked about her dreams, her fears, and her marriage. She answered with hesitation at first, but his tone was never judgmental. He listened without interruption, and that alone felt like a gift. Emma found herself smiling at her phone more than she had in years. It wasn't about attraction. It was about feeling seen, appreciated, and understood. Michael had an uncanny ability to find the right words at the right time. He never flirted or crossed any lines, yet there was an emotional pull she couldn't deny. Every message left her wondering what he was doing, what he was thinking, and why she couldn't stop thinking about him. Weeks passed. Daniel remained distant, consumed by work. He had stopped noticing the little things, like the way Emma's laughter had grown softer, or how she lingered by the window more often. Their conversations were short and predictable. She realized they had become two people sharing a house but living separate lives. Then, one late afternoon, while Emma was locking up the gallery, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "I was hoping to see you." She turned around and froze. It was Michael. He looked exactly as she remembered, calm, confident, composed. He held a soft smile that made her both nervous and relieved. "I had a meeting nearby," he said. "I thought I'd stop by and say hello." Emma hesitated, unsure what to say. Her heart pounded, but she managed a polite smile. "It's good to see you," she said quietly. They ended up walking together to a nearby cafe. The air between them was charged with something neither wanted to name. Over coffee, they spoke easily, their conversation flowing naturally as if they had known each other for years. Emma felt herself relax in his company. No pretending, no polite restraint, just honesty. He listened to her talk about her life, her loneliness, and her fears of growing invisible. Michael's eyes softened. "You're not invisible, Emma," he said quietly. "You just stopped being seen by the person who was supposed to look the closest." His words hit something deep inside her. She looked down, stirring her coffee to avoid his gaze. He hadn't said anything wrong, but his truth lingered like an echo. When they stepped outside, the wind brushed against her hair and she shivered slightly. Michael instinctively reached out, steadying her by the arm. It was such a small gesture, brief and respectful, yet it sent a jolt through her. That touch carried warmth, sincerity, and a kind of safety she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. They parted ways soon after, promising to stay in touch. But that night, as Emma lay in bed beside her sleeping husband, she couldn't silence her thoughts. Michael's words replayed in her mind, and she realized how true they were. She wasn't unhappy with Daniel out of anger. She was simply unseen. Her heart ached with a longing to feel something real again, something alive. The following week, Emma and Michael continued to meet occasionally. Coffee breaks, brief walks, moments that stretched into hours without either of them realizing. Each encounter deepened their bond. They spoke about everything except what was happening between them. There was no talk of love, no promise of more, but the silence between their words was filled with something unspoken, undeniable, One evening as they stood by the lake where Emma often jogged, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Michael turned to her, his eyes searching hers. This isn't easy for me either, he said softly. Emma felt her throat tighten. I know, she whispered. Neither moved closer. Yet the air between them was alive with tension, not the kind born from impulse, the kind rooted in deep emotion, respect, and confusion. They were both aware of the line they hadn't crossed, but also of the closeness that felt impossible to ignore. As the wind rippled across the water, Emma looked away, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know how I got here, she said. I never meant for any of this to happen. Michael's expression softened. You don't have to explain. Sometimes people find each other for reasons they can't control. Maybe I was meant to remind you of something, to wake up something that life made you forget. She didn't answer. Her heart felt heavy, yet somehow lighter too. That night when she returned home, Daniel was sitting in the living room, still working on his laptop. He barely looked up as she entered. You're home late, he muttered. I stayed to finish some things, she said. Her voice steady, though her mind was a storm. Daniel nodded absently, returning to his screen. The distance between them was no longer invisible. It was tangible. Emma watched him for a moment, then quietly walked upstairs. When she reached her room, she stood before the mirror studying her reflection. She wasn't sure what she saw anymore. A wife, a woman, lost in confusion, or someone rediscovering parts of herself she had long forgotten. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Michael, just making sure you got home safe. Sleep well, Emma. She read the message 3 times before typing back. I did. Thank you. Then she put the phone face down, turned off the light, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. She knew she was walking a fragile line, one she never thought she'd cross. Yet in her heart, she couldn't deny the truth. Michael had become a part of her world in ways she couldn't explain or undo. She closed her eyes, and once again she saw his face illuminated by the soft glow of the cafe light, his voice echoing the words that wouldn't leave her mind. You just stopped being seen by the person who was supposed to look the closest. And with that thought, Emma realized something she didn't want to admit. She had already begun to drift toward a truth she couldn't control. The days after that message from Michael felt heavier than usual. Emma woke up every morning trying to convince herself that she could stop thinking about him. She told herself it was just friendship, a connection that had filled the silence in her life. But the truth was far deeper, and she knew it. Each time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped. Each time she saw his name, she smiled before reminding herself she shouldn't. Daniel remained distant, unaware of the quiet shift in his wife's world. He was planning another business trip, already buried in his laptop even before breakfast. Emma tried to start a conversation about the house, the upcoming gallery event, anything, but his replies were short, distracted, automatic. It felt like speaking into an empty room that evening. Emma stood by the kitchen window, watching rain trace lines down the glass. She thought about the last time it had rained this way, the night she'd met Michael. The thought made her chest ache. She knew she couldn't keep walking this path. Something had to change, even if she didn't know what that meant yet. A few days later, the gallery hosted its biggest art exhibit of the season. Emma dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress and a simple silver necklace. As she greeted guests and smiled politely, her mind wandered. Then she saw him, Michael, standing near one of the modern paintings, his hands tucked in his pockets, a quiet smile on his face. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected him to come. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, it felt like the crowd around them disappeared. He approached her slowly, his expression gentle but unreadable. You look happy tonight, he said. She smiled softly. Do I? He nodded. You should. You belong in places like this, surrounded by beauty. His words made her heart flutter, not because they were romantic, but because they felt sincere. They spent most of the evening talking between the art displays, careful not to draw attention. Every moment felt effortless, yet dangerous. As the event ended and people began to leave, Michael offered to walk her to her car. The night was calm, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Emma hesitated before saying, "Michael, we can't keep doing this." He stopped walking, looking at her with quiet understanding. "I know," he said. "But it's not easy, is it?" She shook her head. "It's not about easy. It's about what's right. I have a husband. I made vows. I don't want to hurt anyone." Michael exhaled slowly. "You're not the kind of woman who betrays people. You just forgot what it feels like to be alive." His words broke something inside her. She blinked back tears, realizing he was right. She had been surviving, not living, moving through days without emotion. Michael hadn't caused her unhappiness. He had only reminded her of it. They stood in silence for a long time. Then, without another word, she whispered, "Goodbye, Michael." He nodded, his eyes filled with quiet pain. "Take care of yourself, Emma." When she drove home that night, tears rolled down her cheeks. Not because she had lost him, but because she had finally faced the truth. She loved a man she could never have, and she had to let him go before it destroyed what little remained of her marriage. The next morning, Daniel noticed her sitting by the window, staring at the garden. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm just tired," she replied. He looked at her for a moment longer than usual, as if seeing her for the first time in months. "You've seemed different lately," he said carefully. Emma met his eyes. "Maybe I have been. Maybe we both have." Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said softly, "When was the last time we really talked, Daniel? Not about work, not about bills, about us." He opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was louder than words. "I miss you," she said finally, her voice breaking a little. "I miss how we used to be, but I don't even know if we can find that again." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, guilt flashing across his face. "I know I've been distant," he said. "Work. It just keeps taking over." "It's not just work," she said. "It's everything. We stopped trying. We stopped seeing each other." Christy shook him. For the first time, he didn't try to argue or defend himself. Instead, he said quietly, "Do you still love me?" Emma looked down, her heart racing. "I want to," she whispered. "But love doesn't survive on memories. It needs to be fed, Daniel. And we've been starving for a long time." He stood there in silence, absorbing her words. Then, to her surprise, he reached out and took her hand. "Then let's fix it," he said. "If you'll let me try." His sincerity caught her off guard. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, he wasn't distracted or distant. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw the man she had once fallen in love with over the next few weeks. Daniel began making small changes. He started coming home earlier, cooking dinner with her, asking about her day. They took walks together again, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes in deep conversation. Slowly, a fragile warmth returned to their home. Emma, however, still carried the weight of her secret. She hadn't crossed a physical line with Michael, but emotionally. She had drifted farther than she ever thought she would. One evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sunset, and decided she needed to close that chapter completely. She picked up her phone and opened Michael's contact. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a long time before she typed, "Thank you for being kind when I needed it most. But I have to find myself again with the life I chose. I hope you understand." She hesitated, then pressed send. The message showed seen, but there was no reply. She didn't expect one. For a long moment, she sat there, tears slipping down her cheeks, feeling both heartbreak and relief. In the days that followed, Emma felt lighter. The ache was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She began painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Daniel noticed and smiled. "That's the Emma I remember," he said. She looked at him, realizing how much she had missed that smile. Maybe love wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about showing up again after you've both lost your way. Months passed. One afternoon, while Emma was hanging a new piece at the gallery, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Michael Dat. Her breath caught for a moment, but this time her heart didn't race. She smiled gently, gratefully. "I saw your exhibit was open," he said. "I just wanted to say congratulations." "Thank you," she said warmly. "It means a lot." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "You seem happy." "I'm trying," she said. "One day at a time." "That's enough," he replied, smiling faintly before walking away. As she watched him go, she felt no regret, only peace. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and though it had caused confusion and pain, it had also awakened something important in her. That evening, when she returned home, Daniel was waiting with 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and said, I was thinking we could take a trip. Just us, somewhere quiet." She smiled. "I'd like that." They sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of gold and violet. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comfortable. Alive. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Daniel kissed her hair gently. "Thank you for giving me a reason to try." As the night deepened, Emma looked up at the stars and thought about how life sometimes leads you through storms just to remind you what truly matters. Michael had been a chapter brief, meaningful, but not the whole story. Her story wasn't about betrayal or loss. It was about rediscovery, forgiveness, and choosing love again, even after forgetting what it felt like. And for the first time in years, she felt free. Sarah had always considered herself the kind of person who saw the best in everyone. She had a warm heart, a loving husband named David, and a comfortable life she had worked hard to build. Yet, no matter how much she tried to enjoy her life, there was always this quiet shadow that followed her younger sister. Emily was charming, funny, and magnetic in ways that made people naturally gravitate toward her. Sarah loved her sister, but over the years she began to notice something uncomfortable. Emily had a way of inserting herself into situations, claiming attention, and somehow making Sarah feel like she was always on the outside. It started small, almost imperceptible. Emily would drop by unannounced, linger longer than necessary, and subtly hint at her own problems, making Sarah feel obliged to offer help. She would borrow clothes or accessories under the guise of just for a few hours and somehow never return them promptly. At first, Sarah laughed it off, thinking it was harmless. After all, sisters were supposed to lean on each other. But the more Emily came into their lives, the more Sarah noticed David's attention shifting, even in subtle ways. One evening, during a casual family dinner, Sarah finally felt the weight of what she had been ignoring. Emily arrived earlier than expected, glowing with confidence, chatting and joking, and instantly became the center of attention. David, usually attentive to Sarah, laughed a little more at Emily's stories, lingered longer in conversation, and occasionally shot glances at her that made Sarah's stomach twist. Sarah tried to ignore it, but she could feel the shift. A small, almost invisible tug at her heart grew stronger. Like a warning she had been avoiding. As the night went on, Sarah watched Emily charm everyone at the table. She recounted stories of her work and social life, casually showing off little accomplishments, and David seemed to hang on every word. Sarah's initial amusement at Emily's stories turned into unease, then jealousy. Not the loud, explosive kind, but a quiet, gnawing feeling that something in her life was slipping through her fingers. She realized, painfully, that Emily wasn't just visiting. They were slowly taking over the space Sarah had built in her own home and in David's attention. After dinner, while clearing plates, Sarah tried to talk to David casually, hoping she wasn't imagining things. "Did you notice how Emily stayed over by the living room the entire evening?" she asked, keeping her tone light. David looked at her, a little puzzled, and replied, "I just enjoy spending time with her. She's fun, and it's nice to see her." Sarah felt her heart tighten. It wasn't that David had done anything wrong, not exactly, but the way he said it, like Emily's presence had become more vibrant and exciting than her own, cut deeper than she expected. That night, Sarah lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every glance. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had allowed her sister to take liberties with her life. Her time, and even the subtle affection she shared with her husband. It wasn't just jealousy, it was a profound awareness that she had been giving too much without asserting her own space. Emily hadn't done anything overtly malicious, but she had gradually claimed pieces of Sarah's life through charm, subtlety, and an unspoken sense of entitlement. The next day at work, Sarah found herself distracted, replaying the previous evening. She noticed little habits of Emily that she had tolerated for too long, the way she joked at her expense, the subtle insistence on attention, the way people listened to her with an almost magnetic pull. Sarah realized that her discomfort wasn't about Emily alone. It was about herself and how long she had ignored her own needs, boundaries, and sense of self by the evening. Sarah made a quiet decision. She wasn't going to confront Emily with anger or accusations that would never solve anything. But she would reclaim control over her life, her home, and her emotional space. It started with small boundaries. She would no longer allow unplanned visits to interfere with her routine. She would politely but firmly decline favors that drained her energy. Most importantly, she would nurture her connection with David, not out of competition, but to remind herself of the life they had built together. The turning point came subtly. One morning over coffee, Emily had called, casually mentioning that she wanted to stop by. Sarah, for the first time in years, said no. "I'm busy today," she replied, her voice calm but firm. Emily's pause over the phone was telling confusion, maybe even irritation, but Sarah didn't waver. She realized that for too long she had allowed others to dictate her life through guilt, charm, and obligation. That pause on the other end was the first sign that the balance was shifting. Later that evening, David noticed a change too. He commented, quietly, "You seem different lately. Stronger, more sure of yourself." Sarah smiled, a mix of relief and cautious pride swelling in her chest. This was the beginning of reclaiming her emotional space. She understood that her battle wasn't with Emily, it was with the patterns she had allowed in her own life. The recognition that she had power to set boundaries and demand respect was both frightening and exhilarating by the end of the week. Emily stopped showing up unannounced. Her calls became less frequent, and Sarah felt a sense of relief she hadn't known in years. But the emotional tension wasn't fully gone. Sarah knew this was only the beginning of asserting herself. The lingering fear that Emily would find ways to insert herself again kept her on edge. She realized she had to be consistent, intentional, and unwavering in her boundaries as part one closes. Sarah stood by the window in the quiet of her living room, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She felt a mix of determination and anxiety. The path ahead would require courage, self-respect, and emotional vigilance. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she wasn't overshadowed by her sister's charm or influence. A life where she controlled her time, her relationships, and her own happiness. And in that moment, a quiet, determined voice in her heart whispered, "It's time to take back what's mine." The next few weeks passed like a quiet storm. Sarah began noticing the difference her small choices made. She had more control over her days, more energy to focus on her home, and a renewed sense of presence in her marriage. David noticed too. He wasn't used to seeing her so calm and confident, and he admired it. But beneath the surface, there was still something unsettled, a question neither of them dared to speak aloud. What exactly had happened between David and Emily when Sarah wasn't paying attention? Sarah didn't want to accuse anyone without reason. But her intuition whispered that there had been emotional boundaries crossed, maybe even temptations entertained. Emily's charm was disarming. She had a way of pulling people in with her laughter and warmth. Sarah remembered all those evenings when Emily and David shared jokes, exchanged knowing glances, and spoke in a rhythm that left her out of the conversation. It wasn't physical betrayal she feared most, it was emotional distance. The silent erosion of connection, determined to protect what was hers. Sarah started spending more quality time with David. She invited him on walks, cooked his favorite meals, and initiated conversations they hadn't had in years. At first, David seemed surprised by her effort, then relieved. He confessed one evening, "It feels like I have you back, Sarah." The words struck deep. She hadn't realized how far apart they'd drifted until that moment. They laughed more, shared stories, and rediscovered small rituals they had forgotten. Slow morning coffees or reading together on Sundays. But just when Sarah thought she had regained her balance, Emily reappeared. It was on a weekend afternoon when Sarah least expected it. The doorbell rang, and there she was, smiling, confident, holding a bottle of wine as if nothing had changed. "I thought I'd surprise you too," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Sarah forced a smile but felt her chest tighten. David, unaware of the tension beneath, invited her in. The air grew thick. Throughout the evening, Sarah observed every word, every glance. Emily complimented David's new haircut, laughed a little too much at his jokes, and made subtle remarks about old memories they'd shared as a family. Sarah tried to remain calm, but the familiar unease returned. Emily was testing boundaries again, inch by inch. When David left to take a call, Emily leaned toward Sarah and whispered, "You're lucky, you know. David's a good man." The tone wasn't kind, it was possessive, challenging. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark listening to David's steady breathing, her thoughts spinning. She knew Emily wasn't just seeking attention, she wanted control. Emily had always needed to feel desired, admired, and in charge. Maybe it wasn't even about David. Maybe it was about winning, proving she could have what Sarah had built. But Sarah wasn't the same woman she used to be. She had learned the cost of silence, and she was done paying it. The next morning, Sarah decided it was time for honesty. Over breakfast, she looked at David and said softly, "I need to ask you something important. Did Emily ever say or do something that made you uncomfortable?" David looked up, startled. He hesitated before replying. "She's always been a little too friendly. But I never crossed a line, Sarah, I promise you that." His tone was sincere, but his eyes showed guilt. Guilt not of wrongdoing, but of awareness. He had noticed Emily's behavior, but never stopped it. That realization hurt more than anything. Sarah didn't explode or accuse. Instead, she nodded and said, "We can't let her keep coming between us, even in small ways." David agreed immediately, almost relieved that Sarah had brought it up. Together, they decided to set boundaries as a couple. If Emily visited, it would be planned and brief. No more late-night conversations, no private jokes, no blurred lines. For a while, things improved. Sarah felt a sense of control again, and David seemed more grounded. But Emily wasn't the type to give up easily. When her calls and visits didn't get the same attention, she started leaving subtle remarks in family group chats or sending nostalgic messages directly to David. "Remember that weekend at the cabin? We had such a good time." It's just harmless words on a screen, but the intent was clear. Sarah found out accidentally one evening when David left his phone on the counter. She saw the message and froze. It wasn't scandalous, but it was enough to reopen every wound she'd tried to heal. She didn't confront him right away. Instead, she sat outside in the cold night air, her heart heavy but clear. She knew she couldn't control Emily's actions, but she could control her response. And this time, silence wouldn't protect her. Later that night, Sarah calmly showed David the message. "This needs to stop," she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was tired. David looked ashamed. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should have blocked her the moment she crossed the line." That was the first time Sarah saw him take full responsibility, and strangely, it gave her peace. David blocked Emily's number that night. It felt final, but Sarah knew the emotional recovery would take time. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Yet something within Sarah had changed. She had always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided confrontation to maintain harmony. But this experience taught her the value of standing firm. She began focusing on her personal growth, taking painting classes, meeting new friends, and spending time alone without guilt. She rediscovered parts of herself she had neglected for years. David noticed her transformation. One evening he told her, "You're stronger than I ever realized." "I think that's what I fell in love with in the first place." Sarah smiled, touched by the sincerity in his words. The trust between them wasn't fully repaired yet, but there was honesty, now a shared understanding. That love wasn't about pretending everything was fine, but facing the cracks together. But Emily's silence didn't last. A month later, Sarah received a message from her short, sharp and emotional. I miss you, Sarah. Why did you turn everyone against me? Sarah read it twice, unsure how to respond. Part of her pitied Emily. Another part was too tired to play that emotional game again. She didn't reply. She realized that sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing. Relationships comes from releasing them. In the quiet days that followed, Sarah reflected on everything she had learned. She wasn't the same woman who once doubted herself, who stood in her own home feeling invisible. She had taken back her power, not by revenge or anger, but by clarity and courage. She had drawn her lines and stood by them, and in doing so, she had saved more than her marriage, she had saved herself. One evening, as she and David sat on the porch watching the sunset, he reached for her hand and said, "We went through a storm, didn't we?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Yes, but we're still here." It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. And for Sarah, real was enough yet. Deep down, she knew the story wasn't completely over. Family ties had a way of resurfacing, especially when pride and old wounds were involved. She didn't know when or how, but Emily would appear again someday. Only this time, Sarah would be ready. The quiet fear that once controlled her had been replaced with strength. And as the sun disappeared behind the hills, she whispered to herself, "No one will take what's mine again." Sarah woke early the morning after receiving Emily's message. A quiet light filtered through the curtains, and the house felt still, holding its breath. She sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, reading and rereading the words. I miss you, Sarah. Why did you turn everyone against me? Her fingers curled around the cup. She didn't feel anger. She felt something gentler, relief, sadness, clarity. She realized she was no longer waiting for Emily's approval. She was waiting for her own peace. David considered calling out to her, but changed his mind when he heard her door open and close softly. He entered the kitchen, paused, and asked, "Everything okay?" Sarah nodded, slowly raising her grip on the mug. "I'm fine. I'm ready." David studied her face. It held something new, a calm resolve. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "Together," he said. "We're together." Over the next week, Sarah and David made a pact between them. No more letting silent tensions steer their marriage. They agreed to talk openly, to share small moments again, and to rebuild trust by actions, not promises. David surprised her by picking up Lily from school. And Sarah surprised herself by saying yes to an art class she had considered but postponed. The house felt fuller not with other people, but with the life they chose together. One afternoon, while Sarah painted in the spare room, she found herself smiling as colors spread across the canvas. The brush strokes weren't perfect. They didn't need to be. This was about expression, not perfection. When David knocked and entered with 2 glasses of lemonade, he watched her quietly for a moment. "You look happier," he said. She didn't hide it. Instead, she admitted it. "I feel lighter." The change wasn't loud, it was gentle, persistent. But even these gentle changes had ripples. Emily's message wasn't a fault line. It was a reminder. Sarah knew Emily would test boundaries again. She received a call from her sister a few days later. "Can we talk?" Emily's tone sounded soft, vulnerable. Sarah looked at David before replying. He nodded. They chose to handle it as a team. They arranged a meeting in a neutral Plaza cafe both knew. Emily arrived, smiled, and greeted them. Sarah noticed how Emily's expression flickered when she found Sarah and David sitting side by side, equal and unshaken. Coffee arrived. The 3 of them sat quietly at first. Emily spoke first. "I've felt lost lately. I thought you were on my side, Sarah, but I feel you turned away." Sarah took a breath. She looked at her sister with honest eyes. "Emily, I never stopped being your sister. But I stopped letting you take my life, copycat style. I stopped letting you stand in my place." Emily's brow furrowed. David reached for Sarah's hand lightly. Sarah continued, "I love you. But I also love the life I built. You and I can coexist, just not at the cost of me disappearing." Emily sat back, silent. The hush stretched between them. Then she spoke in a small voice. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that." Sarah nodded. "Then let's change it. From now on, we're sisters, not rivals." The cafe's ambient hum returned. David exhaled. The moment shifted subtly. It wasn't resolved completely, but the direction changed. When they left the cafe, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. The drive home was quiet, comfortable. David took her hand as they stopped at a red light. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. Sarah rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for staying." In the weeks that followed, Sarah stopped looking at her marriage as something fragile. It wasn't perfect, but it was present. She started inviting laughter into their home again. They had movie nights, board games with Lily, spontaneous walks around their neighborhood. They didn't pretend past hurts didn't exist. They acknowledged them and left them on the side of the road, like old baggage. One evening, Sarah found her journal tucked away in the drawer. She flipped to the entry she once feared would destroy everything. "I feel like a stranger in my own life." She stared at it and realized how far she had come. She closed it, walked outside, and let it sit unopened. She didn't need to revisit that chapter. It had served its purpose. Months later, the day arrived when Sarah held an artwork of hers in a small exhibit. David and Lily stood beside her as people admired the piece of colorful canvas capturing the strength of a woman who chose herself. Emily appeared to, quietly observing from the background. Sarah caught her gaze, nodded thoughtfully, and Emily nodded back. No words were exchanged, but there was something quieter than an apology or respect that night. After Lily had gone to bed, Sarah and David sat on the porch. The night air, warm and gentle. Sarah leaned into David. He wrapped his arms around her, and she felt safe. "We made it through something hard," she said, "and we found something real." David kissed her forehead. "We did. And we're building something new." As the stars blinked overhead, Sarah thought back to the moment when she made that decision, when she stood at the edge of losing everything and chose to fight for herself. She realized the story wasn't a dramatic twist or scandal. It was about reclaiming her voice, her worth, and her life. Her sister would always be part of her story, but no longer the chapter that defined her. And in the quiet closing of that chapter, Sarah finally felt freedom. Freedom from shadows of doubt, from the fear of being invisible, from waiting for others to give her permission to shine. Elliot and Lily and their home, her home, became the proof that boundaries don't weaken love. They refine it. As the night deepened, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered, "I won't settle for less than I deserve." And in that promise, the past dissolved and a new future began.